Welcome to Lead and Follow, a podcast that explores how great collaboration actually happens. I'm your host, Sharna Fabiano, author of the book Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork. And I'm pleased to bring you the latest research, insights, and learning methods to help you work together better with the people around you. I help founders, solopreneurs, and new leaders become great at collaborating because I've seen how much more becomes possible when people integrate their ideas, perspectives, and strengths in a practical way. To learn more about coaching with me and for a one-time discount on your first session, go to sharnafabiano.com/coaching and enter the promo code podcast. The link is in the show notes. And now, here's the episode. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Jane Bentley. Jane is a percussionist and drum circle facilitator from Glasgow, Scotland, specializing in rhythm, improvisation, group dynamics, and communication skills. She completed a PhD on drum circle improvisation and facilitation, highlighting the effects of group music making on human well-being and revealing its fascinating leadership and followership dynamics. Jane's work as a facilitator has broken new ground in the field of health and well-being through her long-term collaborations with mental health occupational therapy staff in the UK National Health Service. She has worked with children in hospitals, in mental health care settings, in prisons, and with people with dementia. I'm so pleased to have Jane here today to share what she has discovered over the years about the power of collaborative leading and following in improvised music. Jane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. One of the many reasons I am excited to have you today is that we have a shared love of improvisation. As listeners know, I studied improvised dance for many years, so I would love to start us off today by asking, what is improvised music? At least, what is it in the way that you practice it?
That's a lovely question. Thank you. And I'd just like to pick up on your many years of practice at it as well, because sometimes we conceptualize the word improvisation as just making things up. And in a sense, as a group of musicians, in my case, playing together, we are making things up, but it is on the basis of a lot of practice and research and building our skills and building our relationship with each other. I was working with a group of improvising singers over the weekend, and the first time that we met, we really had to take that time to meet each other, to develop that relationship, and really to learn to follow each other. So it's kind of this collaborative, in the moment music making with an intent to create something new together.
Thank you. Yes, so many echoes for me from the social dance world. I'd like to ask you about improvised drumming in particular. Will you give us a little bit of a sense of how that works?
I think for me, drumming is one of the most accessible instruments in the world. Of course, it would take years to learn to be an expert drummer, but actually within 15 or 20 minutes, it's possible to have a group of people who have never drummed before, playing music with each other that's connected, that's collaborative, where people are following each other. So for me, the drum, it is a tool for human relationship and human well-being on many, many different levels. I think it can be very physically cathartic, just playing a drum. There is that emotional connection with it in the different, emotional tones and tenors that the music can take. There's a social component to it in terms of dialogue with other people and that joint effort. And there's this transpersonal possibility when we make music together. So for me, a drum is a tool for group dynamics, for group communication, for group music making, but for that music making to be a tool to deepen group relationship and understanding.
When I experienced your drum circle session at the Global Followership Conference in Glasgow, I was rather stunned by how accessible it was. And perhaps this is the nature of the instrument, right? So if you had handed me a violin, for example, perhaps it would not have felt so accessible. Was that just my experience, or is there something particular about drums and rhythm that feels, more native to us than other instruments?
I think rhythm is enormously innate to us as human beings. I once had the privilege of taking one of my drums to a neonatal ward in Paris and working with a tiny infant in a sense, premature, before they're officially born, and to be able to play a rhythm. And, in my case, I had to follow that infant and the rate of their breathing. And as soon as I clicked into that, we found this meeting point, and you could objectively see on the monitor, you could see the heart rate going down, which means they're relaxing, and the oxygen rate going up, which means they're breathing more deeply. And then if I would stop drumming, I could see these figures move the other way again. So in a sense, before we're officially born, we have this capacity to connect and respond to music. And it's the same at the very end of life, of hearing being one of our first and last senses. And again, having worked with people very near death, that if you can just be aware enough to follow somebody and to find that meeting point, that becomes a key that unlocks this door to going somewhere new and probably unexpected as well, something that's unplanned. And I think if I'm sort of training others or other musicians, it is one of these key things, is to build our toolbox of responses so that we're better able to follow in the moment and, in a sense, become expert followers in the situation.
Jane, I know this might be a bit hard to put into words, but I'd love to ask you to expand a little bit more on the experience of following in these musical interactions. In other words, how exactly would you say that our following skill allows us as a group to discover together and to improvise something new together?
I think it's really this dance of leader followership. It certainly happens in musical improvisation that we all step into the role of follower, and then things can get quite repetitive or they're not going anywhere. So it's this constant dance between having something to offer or to make a suggestion to the group musically, which then will be up to others to choose whether they decide to say yes to that and go with it and follow it and build on it or not. And I think it's the saying yes and the joining of something that then will take the music into unexpected directions, and to find that common place. Otherwise, it would just be people sitting, creating noise side by side. I think the following element is the key to it sounding musical and sounding connected. But it takes that element of leadership as well sometimes, just to bring in the new idea or the next step of the music, the next phase or development of it. I wonder how that relates to dance. I'm curious.
Well, we use very similar language, at least in social dance, right? The language of proposing and following, or offering or inviting, and then going along with. But of course, in social dance, it's only two people. So the roles of leader and follower are somewhat more clear and usually predefined.
Yes, I think the challenge in music is we're often working with many more people, 3, 4, 5, 50 people. So it's then, it takes different forms depending on how many people are involved. And obviously the degree of listening and the degree of following has to be dialed up when we have that many more people. And, the degree of saying yes and cooperation and, buying into that collective effort that's there already.
I would love to move on to your research. Your PhD explored these dynamics of leading and following, proposing and saying yes in very fine detail. And you invented a marvelous phrase to describe it, which is integrative musical interaction. I love this phrase, and I wonder if you could tell us what it means and how you developed it.
Thank you. So integrative, being integrative of ability. So the kind of workshop practice that I embody really can involve people, whether they're a classical musician, highly trained, or whether this is their first time with a tambourine. And I think this is one of the stunning things about music, is there can be room for everybody within the music. If it's structured right and facilitated right, that, the presence of a rhythm allows people to follow and allows people to find their place within that structure. So it is very possible for music to be used in the workplace, in a hospital setting, in a prison, in all these different places. The musical part of it speaks for itself. But then for me, when I was researching these forms, my original title of my thesis was Music for Non-Musicians, because I was looking at that integrative piece but I used a methodology called grounded theory, which is one that kind of undoes you as you go through it. It should ideally challenge your preconceptions, which it did. And I found that the educational process through that and in learning to improvise in an inclusive way was actually this process of entunement and attunement, and the development of the interaction that came through that music making. That harks back to some of our earliest forms of interaction. Again, we're back to babies and caregivers. And those first early interactions are improvisations as well. And there's propositions from either side, from the baby or from the caregiver, which can then be accepted, reflected, built upon. And I think that sits very, very deeply within us, which is what makes music so accessible, but also which makes it so helpful as a tool for connection and, as a tool for therapeutic purposes as well. And so the educational process in these settings is not necessarily to be a better musician. It always helps to have more skill. But our educational process is almost pretty much to become a better follower, to become more aware of larger and larger chunks of our environment and the things that make it up and the things that are happening within that environment, so that we can then formulate a response to it and co-construct things together.
I wonder if you could even take us a little bit through the development of a group, like what happens, how do those roles evolve, over time in a group as they learn to improvise better together?
Within this methodology, particularly in the drumming community, we talk about this idea of a map. And if you imagine an arc going from low bottom left to high top right, with the facilitator actually at the beginning being fairly dictatorial in terms of giving the group some of these tools to come together. And at that point, the makeup, it's a group of individuals when we first come and sit down. And so the first little interventions are designed to help us just cross that threshold from just being individuals to feeling part of a group and feeling acknowledged as a group. And part of that is co-constructing this language of facilitation, so the signs or signals that we might use to conduct the group in the beginning. So as a facilitator, I might have all the power in that situation, nearly. Moving forwards, my facilitator's job is to really deeply follow that group and to follow its progress and to try and see signs of musicality and contribution emerging within that group so that it can be reflected back to itself. So in slightly later stages, we might have half the group just rest for a while and half the group play, so that actually that space and that acknowledgement of the other then takes us as participants into a very different way of relating and playing. As the group progresses, as the facilitator, I might highlight different behaviors that are happening or different musical offerings and pick 5 or 6 players and have the rest of the group stop. And actually that music is self-emerging from that group. And my job is to try and find that music that's there and reflect it back to the group in the service of the whole group reaching its next level of functioning and operation, using the music created by the group to build the musicality of the group, in a sense, and to just take incremental steps musically and in skill and in our ability to listen and contribute to each other. So that actually, as a participant, it probably feels very intuitive. There's not a lot of overt teaching. It happens on the run and it happens. So I'm improvising at the same time as the group is, but I just have this toolbox of responses and places to go and ideas and ways to shape things that will help the group reach the next level.
I do want to underline that you're describing different kinds of leading and following, which I feel like is really important because there's so much literature out there of styles and types and you're this or you're that. And what you're describing, if I'm hearing it correctly, is that actually it's the development and the varying of how you're leading and potentially how we're following as well in that circle that builds the sophistication and the richness of the group output. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. And, as the leader at the outset, my job ultimately is to be the biggest follower of the group possible and to end the workshop actually with the participants all having musical autonomy, co-creating together, connected together, so that actually I don't need to take that leadership role anymore. And they're a functioning musical group who could continue to play by themselves. So in a sense, I've facilitated myself out of a job. Terrible business model.
Yes, it is. Right, terrible business model. However, it's a fascinating progression of leading and following.
Yes. Yeah, and it's a fascinating dance as well between, again, for the participants starting off very much as followers and in a sense kind of responding to what's requested of them, whilst at the end actually everybody could be a leader at any point, depending on how they contribute, but it's also dependent on everybody being a follower at the same time and being able to respond to what's happening in the environment.
Absolutely. You only get that capacity for anyone in a group to lead at any time if everyone in the group can also follow. That's a central theme of the podcast right there. So, Jane, you've worked with so many different kinds of interesting community groups. I wonder if you could give us some examples of how you have used this model in some of those settings.
Certainly. So one of my favourite groups from an improvisational point of view would be working with one of Scotland's national orchestras, the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. And I take two members of the orchestra into a locked hospital ward, and it's working with people who have dementia, who find themselves almost at a crisis point in their development and need to take this time in hospital to sort out what the next stage might be. So it's a very, very tough period in people's lives, and obviously a lot of cognitive challenges that go with that. And so as our team of three, our brief is to do creative music together. So not just the idea that, if you're older, you deserve the old songs and the old tunes, that actually we're always more than our histories, and we always have the possibility to create something new, whatever is happening to us. And so, again, as a group, we have to be the ultimate followers, because the conditions that people are in makes it very, very hard for them to follow us at the beginning. So we really have to dig deep and to reach in, to find these points of connection with people and to find that starting place musically, personally, socially, so that actually once we've reached that point of connection, we can then build and go somewhere together. But we can never just go in with the plan that we might have constructed and say, come and join us. We really have to cross that bridge to meet people where they are. But beautiful things happen. People get up and dance. And, we had a husband and wife where the wife was visiting, and they eventually ended up dancing together beautifully to this music. And she sat down and said, we haven't danced together in 50 years.
Wow.
The music just hit him at the right spot where he was able to feel it and respond to it. And then if we can respond to him and just, create that space for his joy, it enabled those things to take place. So really following being that key to unlocking the unknown and the possibility for something unexpected that may be more than we could ever have planned for, had we stuck to our plan and our ideas and way of doing things. So it's like having this infinite toolbox of responses that we can bring to meet a situation.
Just to make this a little more concrete for listeners, would you share what some of those tools might be that you are drawing on? It's almost as if you are intentionally putting the patient in the position of leader, even if they're not aware of it at the time, and then deciding to follow them. What are you actually doing? Are you changing sounds, timing?
Pretty much everything. Yeah, I think everything is up for grabs in terms of almost the level of volume. Is that acceptable to somebody? Is it too loud or too soft as well? Can people actually hear it and perceive it? There's a level of physical proximity or distance, which somebody might be comfortable with. There's often, particularly in that setting, the tempo, the time at which things take place. Often, if you have dementia, we find we need to slow things down. And once that happens, actually, it can be quite transforming. Somebody who might have just shown a little bit of interest or looks like they're not quite aware of what's going on, as soon as we slow down that music, they can suddenly come alive because it's reached that kind of pace of perception that fits somebody. So we're always, trying to offer something and trying to assess how that's landing with somebody, which could, manifest in physical movements. It might be just a change in the rate of somebody's breathing or a small movement of a finger or a toe. We build on what's there, and then we ideally go somewhere together with somebody and create music based on, the tapping of somebody's hand, or a smile or a level of excitement, or even, if eyes start to close and people start to look tired, it's fine. We'll create that atmosphere just for somebody to rest as well. They may have been walking around all day distressed, and actually for them to fall asleep in front of us might be the best possible outcome. So we're not trying to force any particular responses, but just to create a musical world that accepts where people are in that moment.
A musical world that accepts where people are. I just love that. And I especially appreciate how you're pointing out the tiny signals that you're looking for in the people you're playing for or with, and that those signals becoming an inspiration for then a new proposal you might send back. Very lead and follow, very back and forth.
Yes, so that becomes our proposal. So we're learning to, part of our job is to learn to read as many of these cues as possible from people themselves, or even from the environment around us as well, so that we can find that meeting point together.
It sounds magical. Do you have another example for us?
I'll give you two more examples. One might be, there was a project in prisons, and this was for men in prison who had children of preschool age. So the idea was to bring children into prison in the visits time with, mothers or caregivers, and to try and do music making as a family unit. So again, it's all about connecting people together again and finding that meeting place. I keep coming back to that point, and music being that place where people can connect in a very egalitarian way, and being a mutual shared activity, again, in a situation where it may be hard to have a conversation. It might be difficult, but there can still be that potential for shared activity and connection. And there's lots of good research that improving family bonding, again, will have an effect on reoffending if people feel connected to their families still.
And in this case, I'm imagining the family members are playing together, yes, rather than you playing for them?
Yes, all the family members playing together. And that led to some beautiful stories of, some of the guys who were in prison on the phone to their wives saying, tell me that nursery rhyme again, whilst being overheard, by his fellow inmates. And, people then building a music drawer at home for their children. So all these different outcomes improving for different people.
There's something coming to my mind right now from dance, and I wonder if there is an analogy in music, or if you experience this the same way. We often say in social dance that it is the leading and following itself that connects people. In other words, the lead and follow is the technology. And even though in social dance, there are lots of different ways to lead and to follow based on preference and style and lots of other things, nevertheless, it's the commitment to those roles that gives rise to connection. Do you feel like that's similar with music, or is it different?
I would say absolutely. And again, when you look into studies of early infant caregiving interaction, it is that dance of leadership and followership. It's never one way. And it's very, very important that role switches over. And that's what makes the relationship, that it's not just a unidirectional thing of one person leading and somebody else following. I think it is that unique thing of being able to hand it over or build on a response from the other, whoever that other way may be in those circumstances.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like that's such a great lesson, even for the workplace, where it can sometimes be difficult to find a sense of lead and follow reciprocation because of the hierarchical structure of an organization. But I'm still championing the both and possibility in those contexts. So we can both have a functional hierarchy, and also we can have the reciprocal dynamic of leading and following with our colleagues for all the reasons you're laying out here, because it builds connection, because it gives rise to creative sophistication, and so many other great things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that relational side, but then that side for new, unexpected possibilities to emerge. That there may be other ways to get to the place that we want to get to. And we have that very clearly in mind. But perhaps the journey can be fluid and might be much better than we anticipated. And if we weren't having that dance of back and forth.
Yes, indeed, indeed. You said you had two examples, Jane. Can we hear the other one?
Oh, sure. I mean, one would be literally like a senior management training where I had 20 healthcare managers for our National Health Service in the UK came and drummed together and then took on that leadership role for the whole group. And for me as a musician, it was such a joy to see people step into that. And really kind of go for it in front of their colleagues and be prepared to fail at that. Particularly in improvisation, there's a lot of possibilities for resilience and learning to do that thing of experimenting, and then picking yourself up and trying again to find that solution that works. So again, we're not running away from the idea of failure. We're building very good responses to it and constructive responses that again lead us to the next iteration that might be the one that works. And just the discussion that emerged from people having gone through this process and then stepped into a leadership role was fantastic.
When you say stepping into a leadership role, can you describe what that looks like in the room?
Yeah, so if you imagine a circle of drummers all making up their own rhythms, but ideally doing that in a cooperative way, then it's possible for a leader, again, to put their drum aside, step into the circle and almost act like a conductor to shape the music of the group. Very simply, you could raise your hands to make it louder or lower them to make it softer, or take the music in a whole other direction by the suggestions you make, or the people within the group that you highlight and reveal to the rest of the group. And it's quite humbling to see beginners step up and actually make a very good job of it. But then to process that and how that felt. And again, I think the clarity of the response that you receive from the group is equal to the clarity of your communication that you give out. And I think there's a lot of learning that gets delivered through that. Does the idea in our heads communicate outwards to the group? And if not, why not? And if it worked, what made it work? What made it so clear? What brought the group with you? There was a great evolutionary musicologist who talked about the idea of music having a floating intentionality, that actually it can hold multiple perspectives at the same time. And in the theory of human evolution and humans as communities and groups, this idea that music could be this behavioral play space where we practice these behaviors of cooperation and dialogue in a space where, it's not life-threatening, the project won't fold, all of these spaces. But actually by rehearsing these behaviors here, we then become more effective to go out and practice it in the world. So if you're the tribe that plays together goes and hunts the mammal together in a very different way to the tribe that didn't. And so that music would have been part of our evolution in this group context, in this collaborative context. And we practice these social behaviors and this teamwork.
100%. And can we please now have drumming circles in every corporate office? I'm kind of serious about this. There is so much undeniable evidence for what you're suggesting here that physical creative practices like drumming and dancing are the original technology of human connection and collaboration. So let's bring them back. I am here for it. Jane, where is your work taking you next?
In the autumn, I'm about to go to Indonesia for the first time and work with a wonderful woman who's a health worker there. And she's been working, again, with communities of mothers and children out there. And she's very interested in brain health. And I did a year with the Global Brain Health Institute and actually realized it's all brain health. Anything we do for mental health, for teamwork, for human relationships is hugely protective to our brain health. So she's working with mothers and children out there, and particularly mothers who might experience alcoholism. So again, we're going to look at that kind of bonding, that following again, to try and restore bonds between each other, but also bonds within community. The idea of community itself is also very neuroprotective, health promoting. And also to look into, there's many, many indigenous musics which have been practiced around the world and are practiced to build these behaviors and communities, and are also behaviors that are being lost. She was talking to her community and they said, oh yeah, we did have the drums and the gongs, but it's just the old people that use them now. So hopefully we're going to look into trying to help revive some of that and to really encourage these resources that peoples have in the world to build these behaviors.
100%. Yeah. I want to also just highlight here, and I'm guilty of this even on the podcast, right? Saying, oh, what can we learn from this, this example, and then take it over into this other context. But sometimes it's actually the practice itself that we need, right? Like before, when I said, let's have drumming in companies, like I'm serious. I really do want to encourage listeners to think expansively and creatively about how we can learn to lead and follow better. So, Jane, thank you so much for sharing about this particular beautiful, transformative, and powerful method of improvised music. Before we close, would you please share with listeners where they can connect with you and learn more about your projects?
I'm online at artbeatmusic.org. I have a LinkedIn profile, and I have a talk all about following, a TEDx talk called The Art of Following, where you can see some of this musical following in action as well. And 600 people playing musical tubes.
Thank you for that. I highly, highly recommend the TED Talk. I experienced the tubes. It was phenomenal. So please do check out the video. We will put all of that in the show notes. Jane, thank you again. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Oh, me too. Thanks so much for having me.
You have been listening to the Lead and Follow podcast. Special thanks to Glover Gill for composing our music. And a huge thank you to all of you who support the show. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or consider joining the Lead and Follow fan club for as little as $3 a month. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes.